Under the hot midday sun, an emaciated bear walked along a narrow path deep into the forest. Her movements were slow and heavy, her fur was ruffled, and her eyes were full of fatigue. Her cub limped alongside her, just as thin and trembling with weakness. They hadn't eaten in days, and the smell of food wafting from afar was their only hope. At the edge of the forest, the mother bear cautiously peered out from behind the trees. Below lay a quiet suburban neighborhood, sunny houses, well-kept yards, and smoke rising from chimneys. She hesitated, but hunger proved stronger than fear. The cub squeaked softly, and the mother took her first step toward human habitation, driven by the instinct to save her baby. Weak and extremely emaciated, she made her way to one of the houses. Her breathing was heavy, almost wheezy. The cub stayed close, looking at the door with hope. The midday sun reflected in their eyes, making the scene particularly touching. Two animals exhausted to the limit, seeking not prey, but salvation. The day began as usual. Michael, an elderly man with a kind face, enjoyed the morning peace in his cozy kitchen. He sat at a wooden table, slowly sipping hot tea, and listening to the birds singing outside the window. Sunlight gently illuminated the room, falling on his mug and an old newspaper. Everything seemed familiar and peaceful, a typical morning in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the forest. After finishing his tea, Michael got up to go out into the yard. He put on his cap, took his mug in his hand, and walked to the front door. But as soon as he opened it, he froze. On the threshold, almost at the steps, stood a huge female bear, so emaciated that it seemed as if every bone was visible under her fur. She was breathing heavily, and next to her, trembling with weakness, stood a small cub. Their eyes were fixed on Michael, full of fear and hope. He felt his heart freeze. For a moment, he wanted to slam the door shut, but he quickly realized that these were not predators, but hungry creatures seeking help. The bear lowered her head, as if apologizing for the intrusion. Michael slowly placed the mug on the table by the door, and trying not to make any sudden movements, said quietly, "Calm down, I'll help you." For the first time in a long time, he felt compassion instead of fear. Michael closed the door behind him and quickly went to the kitchen. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from excitement and concern. He took several pieces of raw meat and a bowl of water out of the refrigerator. The midday sun flooded the neat yard, illuminating the manicured lawn and the neighboring houses in classic American style. Carefully carrying the food, Michael headed for the door where the mother bear and her cub stood, both extremely emaciated and thin. Approaching closer, he placed the meat and the bowl right by the door and took a step back. The mother bear cautiously approached, sniffing the food, while the cub immediately rushed to the bowl, hastily grabbing pieces. Their movements were slow and cautious, but their eyes were already shining with gratitude. Michael watched as the animals had the opportunity to eat their fill for the first time in a long time, and felt both anxiety and relief. Realizing that they needed further help, Michael took out his phone and called the Wildlife Rescue Service. He explained, "A mother bear and her cub have come to my house. They are hungry and exhausted." On the other end of the line, they promised to send specialists as soon as possible. As he stood in his yard watching the animals, the soft daylight reflected off their fur, making the scene both disturbing and touching. A small miracle amid an ordinary suburban morning. 30 minutes after the call, a white truck with the words Wildlife Rescue Service written on it pulled into Michael's yard. A green logo with a bear paw gleamed on the sides. Two rescuers emerged from the cab, wearing protective vests and gloves, carrying portable cages and first aid kits. The sun beat down on the windshield, and a light breeze stirred the dust at the gate. The mother bear and her cub stood by the porch, tired but no longer frightened. One of the rescuers approached them cautiously, speaking softly so as not to scare them away. The second held a blanket in his hands and opened the cage, where bedding had already been laid out. Michael watched from the porch, feeling a slight excitement. The scene resembled a touching moment of trust between humans and wildlife. When the animals calmed down, the rescuers carefully lifted the cub and helped the mother bear into the cages. Both were placed in the back of the truck and secured with straps. Michael nodded gratefully to the rescuers, and they promised that the family would receive everything they needed at the rehabilitation center. The truck set off down the road, carrying them toward a new life. The white Wildlife Rescue Service truck stopped at the gate of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Sunlight illuminated the spacious grounds with green fences and neat enclosures. The rescuers opened the back door and carefully removed the cages. Several veterinarians were already waiting for them with stretchers and soft blankets. The mother bear and her cub looked exhausted, but now there was a glimmer of confidence in their eyes. Help was finally at hand. They were carried inside a spacious box where there was clean water and food. After a while, the veterinarians began their examination. They checked their breathing, fur, and signs of exhaustion. Then they brought large bowls of meat and fruit. The cub, forgetting its fear, was the first to reach for the food, while its mother growled quietly, as if thanking the people for their care. One of the doctors smiled. Moments like these reminded him why they did their work. Now the pair will stay here until they have fully recovered. Several weeks passed. The veterinary team cared for the bear and her cub every day, feeding them fresh meat, monitoring their wounds, and helping them regain their strength. During this time, they changed noticeably. Their fur became shiny again, their eyes filled with life, and their movements became confident. The mother bear now looked majestic and calm as she watched her cub play, turning over branches and pebbles. The veterinarians recorded their behavior to make sure the animals were ready to return home to the wild. One afternoon, when the sun was high and the air was filled with the scent of pine needles, Michael arrived at the center, the very man whose house the emaciated bears had once come to. He stopped at the fence, holding a small bag of fruit in his hands, just a token of gratitude to fate. Seeing the cub frolicking near its mother, who was calmly looking at him, Michael smiled and said quietly, "Good to see you both doing well." His eyes glistened a little with emotion. The veterinarians approached and said that in a few days they would be released back into the wild, far from human settlements. Michael stood there a little longer, looking at the bear as if saying goodbye, and as he walked away, he turned around one last time, this time with a smile of relief. This touching rescue reminds us how powerful compassion can be. Even the smallest act of kindness can change, and sometimes save an entire life. Subscribe and help us give more animals a second chance. See you next time.